Welcome back, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason. I'll be your host on this CFL talk show, Hussey's Huddle. In this video, I give my 10 takeaways from week 1 of the 2021 CFL season, and it was really as unpredictable as everyone thought it was going to be, but I really loved it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in week 2. But really quickly, before we get started, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do it is by hitting that like button and subscribing to Hussey's Huddle for more CFL content just like this. I appreciate it. And with that said, let's get started. Number 1. Zach Collaros looks the fittest he's been in years. So Zach Collaros looked really good in week 1, honestly. I think he was probably the best quarterback on the field in week 1. And it might be just me, but he looks the liveliest he's been in years. His movement ability looked on point in week 1, and he just looked so comfortable in this Winnipeg offense. I think this Winnipeg offense is just so quarterback friendly. Even though Zach has that great skill set, it's just that running game gives them such a good opportunity to set up plays on play action, bootlegs, do that kind of thing. And Collaros is actually, one thing I really underrated about him in my roster review series was that scrambling ability. I never really gave him too much credit for that, but he looks to possess that going into this season. But he looked like he's in the best shape he's been in years, and that's honestly what I take away from week 1 for Winnipeg. Number 2, the Ticats need to get healthy and quick. Really hard to overstate how important all of these pieces that Hamilton had out in week 1 is to Hamilton's success, and it really showed. And I really did overlook this when I was making my game pick last week and picking Hamilton to win the game. I really overvalued this offensive line. Reigning offensive lineman of the year, Chris Van Zyl, didn't play in the game. I really overlooked that, especially with Winnipeg's strong defensive line. They were just ripping right through the middle and on the outside, and it was just a big loss in the trenches. And honestly, another big loss for Hamilton was Braylon Addison, the second wide receiver, being out. Jalen Acklin really stepped up in his absence, but at the same time, I think Addison's really, really important for this team to take the pressure off of Banks, and I think he's more of a complete route runner than Banks and can do a little bit more in terms of versatility-wise, but I think he's really important for this Hamilton offense. He was arguably, not even arguably, he was their second most important player in 2019, so it's really important that they get those two guys back. And then on the defensive side, they're missing their 2 Canadian starters with Ted Laurent and Tunde Adeleke, and Laurent, arguably the best run-stuffing Canadian defensive lineman in the league and been a star player in this league for a long time. And then Adeleke was really important part of that secondary, and maybe if he's there, they don't give up those big plays to Kenny Lawler in that week 1 game against Winnipeg. And so it's really important for Hamilton to get healthy and really quick because they play Saskatchewan this week. It's going to be a tough game. They have to play on the road. And then they have to go on the road to Montreal, I believe, in week 3. And that's going to be another tough thing if they lose against Saskatchewan. So it's really important for Hamilton to avoid going in that 0-2 hole, and getting healthy and getting some of these guys, if not all of them, back on the field as quickly as possible is so vital to their success this season. Number 3, what were the BC Lions thinking? Of course, I'm talking about the Mike Riley situation. I don't know really how to start with this because, you can talk about it from the whole betting angle, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on when I bring this up again. But just from the BC Lions perspective, this is such a head scratcher for me. I think head coach Rick Campbell really dropped the ball on this one. I think they should have made that call to not dress Riley for that game. You just watch him throw, and you just don't see a CFL quarterback throw a ball like that, honestly. He looked like final year Peyton Manning out there, and anybody that watched Peyton Manning's last year in the NFL, pretty yikes. So I don't know what BC Lions are thinking because it's only week 1 of a 14-game schedule. I know it's a shorter schedule this year, but it's only week 1, and you have this quarterback that you've paid a lot of money to. I think he's the highest paid quarterback in the league and player in the league still. And he's 36, not getting any younger, and you force him out there when he's hurt in the first game of the season and risk him getting even more injured. And it's just not good asset management by the BC Lions, and they didn't really manage the asset very well in 2019 either. So pretty concerning start to the season for BC, but we'll see how that situation works out. If Riley's healthier this week, is he going to start? Or is Nathan Warwick, who honestly, I was really happy for Nathan Rourke that he got the start. I mean, it sucks under those circumstances, but I was impressed with what I saw from him. But honestly, I think BC really mismanaged the situation, and they really shouldn't have had Mike Riley dressed for that game. Number 4. We didn't really learn much from Lions Rough Riders. So this was your classic game of two halves. Saskatchewan playing really, really well in the first half, looked like they were their best version of themselves from 2019 once again. And then in the second half, I mean, obviously you have the weird quarterback situation with BC, but then they are somehow still able to claw their way right back into the game and almost steal it again. After Mike Riley comes in, looks terrible, but he was still completing passes. BC was just making play after play after play, keeping themselves in the game. TJ Lee with a really nice interception at one point. So I didn't really take too much from this game that I didn't think going in. I thought the Riders performed kind of what I thought they were. I think they were talented, but they have some flaws. Like we saw early on in the game, the offensive line got off to a really good start. They weren't giving up a lot of pressure. The ball was getting out of the hand of Cody Fajardo very quickly. You know, the offense was really humming. But in the second half, they forced him to hold the ball a little longer, and that offensive line really showed its weaknesses and really blocking a rookie defensive line for BC. It wasn't a great showing in the second half, especially because of this offense stalling. And again, I think the Riders have so much talent, top-end talent, especially Shaq Evans, Cody Fajardo. But I think there are holes in this roster, and we'll have to see if those holes are filled and if these guys will step up, these new guys coming in here. And I'm really excited to see how that plays out in the future. And ditto the BC Lions, who really flashed talent on the perimeter. Like I was saying in my review series, they're very good at wide receiver and DB, but they still look to have a lot of flaws in the trenches. The offensive line had some good moments in this game, started to turn it around in the second half. The defensive line looked toothless in the first half, and I think it was a really inconsistent game for both teams, and that's why it honestly ended up being so entertaining. But not a lot to take away from a long-term thought process standpoint for me. Number 5. It's McLeod Bethel Thompson time in Toronto. So McLeod Bethel Thompson simply had a really good game against Calgary. Threw for over 350 yards, completed 26 of 37 passes, 2 touchdowns. But the most important thing, no interceptions. He looked really poised and confident in new head coach's Ryan Dinwiddie's offense, and looked to have really instant chemistry with Ricky Collins Jr., one of their big offseason signings. But like I said, the most important thing is he avoided that big mistake that he's been prone to throughout his career. It's honestly hard to envision Nick Arbuckle coming back and taking this starting job anytime soon, especially with him banged up, and Bethel Thompson still playing very well. So I think McLeod Bethel Thompson, it's his time to take the reins for the Toronto Argonauts this season, and I'm really interested to see how far this goes for him. If he's a guy that's capable of winning a Grey Cup in this league, or is he a guy that a lot of people thought he was last season, which was a big empty stats guy that doesn't really win a lot of games. So we'll have to see how it turns out, but it's McLeod Bethel Thompson time in Toronto. Number 6. Stamps fans shouldn't be concerned yet. So the Calgary Stampeders had a pretty disappointing opener to the season against the Toronto Argonauts. They had the lead for the most part of the game, but the Argos really were playing really well, and they were keeping the score close throughout the entire game. Never allowed Calgary to take that big 2-score lead. Toronto was really outstanding that day. But Calgary didn't play their best either, and I think that's reason for optimism for this team. 2 crucial mistakes by starting running back Kadeem Carey really hurt the Stamps in this game, and I think that played just a massive factor in them losing. So first he had a 15-yard penalty after the whistle in the second half, right after he was just tackled after making this incredible run, and that really hurt the team. But then later on in the fourth quarter, he fumbles deep in his own territory, and that leads to the Toronto touchdown a few plays later. And, those 2 plays really flipped the script for Toronto. I know you have the Ricky Collins Jr. fumble. Toronto made their fair share of mistakes as well, but I think Calgary should not panic based on that one game. It was just a pretty unlucky game, and people forget that they actually did lose week 1 against Ottawa in 2019, so the team that only won 3 games last year. So I wouldn't be too concerned yet if I'm the Calgary Stampeders. I think they still had their good amount of moments in this game, and I'm just really interested to see how they play against BC on Thursday. Number 7. The Red Blacks defense will keep the team afloat this season. So Ottawa gave up a ton of yards on paper, but didn't give up a ton of big plays to Edmonton. Obviously, the 3 INTs really stand out to you. They had the pick 6 that ultimately was the difference in winning the game by Abdul Kanay, who had an outstanding game, arguably player of the week in my opinion. But the entire defense played with a ton of effort up front and tackled extremely well. They didn't allow that big play to Edmonton. They didn't allow yards after the catch. And this really echoes much of what I said in my roster review, where I said this defense will keep them in a lot of games and will give them a chance to win, keeping the score close. And generally speaking, if you have a good defense and you just have a little bit of production out of the offense, you'll get there. But number 8, Ottawa's offense was about as good as expected. So that is to say, they weren't very good at all. This offense really struggled against Edmonton, especially up front on the offensive line, where they were totally outmatched by a great defensive line. They were starting a lot of inexperienced players for the Canadian game, and they were just completely outmatched. Matt Nichols at quarterback, he looked incredibly limited by his injury, and we honestly didn't get to see much of these new receivers and what they could do because they couldn't push the ball down the field. They were just incredibly limited on offense. 70-something passing yards really does tell you the whole story there. And they really couldn't get anything going on the ground either. And they were extremely lucky to win this game, given how poorly this offense played. I don't want to take anything away from Ottawa, but the offense really struggled in week 1. I think Nichols is a quarterback that needs some rushing support to be successful. He's not a guy that you're going to drop back 40 times a game and really let him sling the ball around, and you don't really have to run the ball too much like some of these other quarterbacks. I think you really need to surround him with a similar support system to what he had in Winnipeg with Andrew Harris and that good offensive line that runs the ball. If they can get this ground game going, I think it's very important for Nichols to gain some confidence off those easy play action throws. But we just didn't see that because they didn't get that ground game going in week 1. So overall, I'm very split on Ottawa's week 1 performance, and we'll just have to keep an eye on this team going forward. Number 9, I jinxed Trevor Harris. Well, folks, my week 1 game picks were a disaster, going 1-3. My lone win coming with Saskatchewan beating BC, and that was so close to going the other way as well. But the most shocking loss of week 1 to me was easily Edmonton's loss to Ottawa. After an off-season of hype from people such as me, the Elks laid a complete egg in their home opener. It was quite honestly a disaster from this offense. Even though they were able to move the ball between the 20s, they just made mistake after mistake. And a lot of that honestly falls on Trevor Harris, the quarterback. Harris threw for over 300 yards in this game, but he also threw the 3 interceptions, which were so crucial in them losing this game, including that pick 6, like we mentioned. He was just really bad in the red zone, as a lot of people have criticized throughout his career. I'm a guy that still believes in Trevor Harris, but there are a couple things that he really needs to clean up before that can happen. The first thing is stop targeting fullbacks, man. There were 2 really important plays in this game that he targeted the fullback James Tuck, and I don't have anything against James Tuck, but you need to throw to a better athlete that will give you a better chance to make a play there than a fullback. And, the first play was that interception where he's running a crossing route across the field. And here's the thing, the throw wasn't that bad. If that's a receiver running that route, that is probably a catch in that scenario. But it was a fullback, and the defender beat the fullback to the spot, and it was an easy interception for the Red Blacks, and that was just really frustrating to watch. And then on the last play of the game, and I know it came down to the 1-yard line, and it was very close, but why are you dumping it down in that scenario when you don't have any time left on the clock? That ball has to go into the end zone. There's just no excuse for not pushing that ball down the field. It's just so hard to catch the ball in that situation and get past a bunch of defenders that are going to be rallying to the ball to stop you from getting into the end zone. And it was just really disappointing to see Trevor Harris's performance in this game. And another thing I thought he really needs to improve on is, again, he needs to push the ball down the field. It's not one of his strengths, but he needs to attempt some of these because he has all these great weapons around him, but they're not going to respect this offense to the fullest extent unless he really utilizes them down the field. They need to get Darrell Walker, Greg Ellingson moving down the field and creating explosive plays with this offense. Ottawa did a really good job limiting them in week 1. But at the same time, he also has to cut down on some of these terrible decisions we saw versus Ottawa. This was honestly the most concerning thing for me because he doesn't usually have these high turnover-worthy games. Maybe he has games where he stalls and fails to move the offense, but he doesn't usually turn the ball over at a rapid rate and make these terrible decision after terrible decision, and I really hope he can bounce back in week 2 against Montreal. I'm very fascinated to see if he can do it. And then number 10, the CFL must fix its depth chart transparency. There's been a lot of talk about single game gambling coming to the CFL's rescue financially, but this will never happen unless the league's weekly lineups or depth charts are completely transparent. Obviously, there's the Mike Riley issue where he was listed as the team starter but didn't start the game. Just a bizarre injury situation there, but again, I've already expressed my thoughts on that. But another example from this week was the Toronto Argonauts not listing Ricky Collins in their starting lineup, then starting him come game time. For betting money to really flow into the league to the extent the CFL hopes, they must become a more open, analytic, and transparent league. Depth chart accuracy is incredibly important to deciding where to place a bet on games, and the league should have publicly available, continuously updated depth charts. And the same really goes for the reporting of injuries, and the CFL has been trying to do this, trying to follow an NFL style of injury reporting, but there's already been a flaw with that with the Mike Riley injury. But the CFL really needs to enforce these rules to build public confidence in the league for these new fans, these younger fans, to engage in betting on the league. But those are just my takeaways from week 1 of the 2021 CFL season. My question for you in the comments: what team impressed you the most in week 1? Be sure to leave a like as well. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.